Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, and other friends. I feel deeply honored to be speaking here this morning. Thailand has an extraordinary record in pioneering universal healthcare without waiting for a distant future when the country would be much richer and economically opulent. There is a global lesson here for all countries with moderate economic means. Thailand is also a country in which new thinking on bettering human life has been going on for many decades. In fact, the late King Bhumibol Adulyadej's innovative idea of a sufficiency economy was a radical contribution in that direction. Providing healthcare for all through a sequence of public initiatives to which the powerful and rightly admired 30 Baht program belongs, has followed a reasoned approach from which the rest of the world has much to learn. In line with Thailand's intellectual leadership in the field of health policy, the initiative of Prince Mahidol Award conferences has been working towards helping to solve global health problems, including those of equity and justice. So it is a great privilege for me to be here this morning at this PMAC meeting. I'm also very happy to be present here when two great medical scientists are being honored by Prince Mahidol's distinguished awards. Greg Winter is a close friend of mine from my own college, Trinity in Cambridge, of which he is master. And I know how brilliant and fruitful for humanity his biochemical research, especially on antibodies, has been. Also, I've heard a lot about Vladimir Hachinsky's splendid neurological work, particularly in combating stroke and dementia. And I can take some pride in that too, since I am an alumnus of Western University, even though I must confess that is only through an honorary degree from there. Progress in healthcare, including in taking better care of vulnerable populations through building an inclusive society, the theme of this year's conference, is greatly dependent on outstanding medical research. And the two laureates have made exceptional contributions not only to science, but through their work also to healthcare and social equity. There's nothing more important to human beings than our health. This is reflected in the fact that people across the world even greet each other through a salute, quote-unquote salute. The word salute originally stood only for being in good health, like saluto in Italian still. By saluting each other, we literally wish each other health. Not more wealth, nor more opulence, not even more happiness, but just better health. The association of health with the goodness of people is so firm in our mind that the word salute has come to acquire an additional meaning altogether, which has overshadowed its original use. Indeed, salutation now stands simply for greeting and wishing each other well. When the poet Alfred Tennyson wrote in his poem addressed to the great Latin poet Virgil, a quote from Tennyson, "I salute thee, Mantovano," he was expressing admiration for the work of his favorite poet. Virgil came from Mantua, hence it's addressed by Tennyson as Mantovano. Of course, Tennyson was not wishing good health to Virgil, who had been dead for nearly 2,000 years when Tennyson was writing. Because of the importance of health to human life and success, salutation had acquired a much larger meaning. The centrality of health in human accomplishment makes it easy to see why the health of vulnerable people must be a major, indeed essential priority of social justice. Every person deserves a salute, and to neglect the health of some while others are being well cared is a sure way of perpetuating injustice in the world. I'm delighted that in this conference, this critically important theme has been taken up, and I'm also very happy that among the invitees here are some of the greatest experts in the world on health and healthcare in the broadest sense, including, just to mention, two of my close friends, Gro Brundtland and Keizo Takemi, people I have had the good fortune of having as very close friends for a long time. In the context of Thailand, the subject of taking care of the health care of vulnerable people may be seen at this time as being of two different types. There is, first of all, what Thailand has largely achieved already, ahead of most countries in the world in a similar situation. The triumphs include, of course, universal health coverage, or at least something very close to it, but also paying special attention to healthcare in rural areas and making the state directly responsible for healthcare expenditure rather than following the cumbersome and ultimately costly procedure of going through a battery of private insurance companies as in the United States. But the achievement includes furthermore, and this is really important for catering to vulnerable people, establishing systems of public discussion on health and healthcare, thereby making the public better informed and also allowing neglected patients to use accessible channels for complaints to the authorities as a way of seeking remedy. For the world, there are a lot to learn from Thailand in these respects, as I have tried to discuss elsewhere. For example, my own country, India, can benefit greatly from studying and learning from the Thai experience, from the importance of universal coverage to the constructive use of public discussion on healthcare, both of which, alas, are badly neglected in my country at this time. A second category of issues relates to what further can be done in Thailand itself to provide better service to the vulnerable people who happen to be neglected. There is, of course, always the possibility of expanding the resources to be dedicated to health, medical research, and healthcare. To cater adequately to more and more vulnerable people do not come cheap, since all the categories of specially vulnerable people tend to have challenging problems of one kind or another, like having difficult diseases to remedy through medical research, to bring down the cost further, as Greg Winter discussed, a subject on which today's laureates can teach us a great deal. There are also people with serious disabilities, which can be hard to rectify, and others subject to particular genetic risks from which some people suffer. There are also locational problems in that it may be expensive to guarantee easy access to good health care for people living in very remote areas. These are some examples of difficulties, and there are others, but they all need attention, and urgently too. There's also the big issue that healthcare may have to include not merely the provision of clinical diagnosis, medicine, and surgery, but also what has come to be called, following Michael Marmot, an old laureate of the Prince Mahidol Award, I believe, the quote-unquote social determinants of health. There is a well-established general connection between economic and social inequality on the one hand and public health on the other, which has been studied by researchers such as Michael Marmot and others like Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson. If living in a sharply unequal society with systematic and significant disparities in economic and social fortunes itself generates frustration and deprivational behavior, for example, in the form of smoking or excessive drinking, connected often with the tension of one's occupation, or a sense of serious discontent that affects human health directly, then the issue of inequality has to be seen as a pervasive challenge that demands a much broader social change, going well beyond providing diagnosis, medicine, clinical advice, and surgery. I cannot go further into this subject on this occasion given the limits of time I have, but I must note firmly here that the hundreds of millions of people in the world, including in Thailand, suffer from vulnerabilities that stem from relational deprivation, in particular being at the bottom of social and economic inequality, rather than from just medical deprivation. Since my time of 15 minutes is up, let me end with a brief categorization of some of the sources of vulnerability. There are, first of all, biological vulnerability arising from having diseases with unknown or imperfect or very expensive cure. And we heard something from both from Greg Winter and Vladimir Hachinsky on those subjects. I would add to that the vulnerability, new vulnerability, arising from overuse and reckless use of antibiotics, which can generate problems of resistance to previously effective treatments. There are, second, economic vulnerabilities arising from poverty, making some people much more prone to health problems connected with undernourishment, lack of medical attention, and inferior food habits, which often go with seeking cheaper and faster food. Third, there are infrastructural sources of vulnerability arising from deficiencies in sanitary and other facilities, which can have disastrous effects on the health of many people. Indeed, this type of what we can call correlate deprivation can be seen as another kind of unfavorable social determinant of health. Fourth, there is the special difficulties arising from inadequate knowledge of demands of good health, which links the success of healthcare very closely with education. We must add to this the inability to make use of the knowledge, even when it exists, of which smoking or excessive drinking may be seen as good examples. Finally, there are relational vulnerabilities that apply to people toward the bottom of highly stratified society, which I already referred to, whether the stratifications relate to social barriers, such as in a historically established caste system, as in my country, or more modern divisions related to class and occupational disadvantages that transcend social history. These are difficult problems, but I end with the comfortable recognition that Thailand has already achieved so much, particularly through universal healthcare and through integrating health in public reasoning, that it can now take on more difficult problems that remains to be addressed. This, of course, is a happy thought. And I close my brief talk with congratulating, indeed I would say saluting, Thailand for what it has already achieved and wishing it well for solving the problems that it must now address. Success in healthcare is never the final end of the story. It's the beginning of another story. There's something of Scheherazade of the Arabian Nights in humanity's battle for better health. Thank you.